Welcome to this video on the art of innovation. I wonder how many of you have watched the Apollo 13 movie. It's a very interesting movie because it describes NASA's most successful failure. It proved how creative one can be when the chips are down and there are no other options to survive. Between the flight crew and the NASA ground staff, they repurposed all sorts of things like a flight manual, suit parts, and even a pair of socks. The crew were able to literally make a square plug fit a round hole, all the while they were being slowly asphyxiated. In order to understand innovation, it's very useful to look at nature and understand what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. We can learn a lot from biological ecosystems. Ecosystems require interaction between organisms, and essential natural processes like the nitrogen cycle and carbon cycle span multiple organisms in an ecosystem and are controlled by various checks and balances. Simple and adaptable organisms have survived the longest. Specialized organisms are vulnerable to small changes in their ecosystem. Complex organisms like your apex predators are vulnerable because of their many dependencies on other organisms and processes. Finally, the more rapid the change to an ecosystem, the more significant the impact can be on that ecosystem. Biological ecosystems and technological ecosystems have a lot in common. The smart technological ecosystems that we've created are subject to the exact same influences as natural ecosystems, except that we're also the source of the rapid change through our evolving needs. We are both the tool makers and the tool breakers. We are the cause and the effect. Our ability to innovate must be tempered by our ability to understand and adapt to the change we have created. The technological tools we've created make life easier, but they also make us lazier and less creative. We increasingly rely on pure computer processing power to solve problems, what I would call the brute force approach. And unfortunately, our ability to create better and better tools increases our reliance on them and decreases our general understanding of the complexity of the ecosystems we've created. Powerful tools encourage us not to think about how to understand and solve problems and leads to lazy thinking. It doesn't encourage us to remember the benefits of simple and elegant solutions. We've a tendency to create tools with more and more features, and unfortunately, we cherish science but fail to consider the importance of artistic talent. We like new technology, readily discard old technology, rarely repurpose old technology, and we don't fix or improve, we simply replace. So enough of the pessimism. How do we do this? How do we become innovative? Specifically, what steps do we need to take in order to improve innovation in the energy sector? As an engineer, it's a bit humbling to realize that innovation is not a science, but actually an art. As Albert Einstein has said, to regard all problems from a new angle requires creative imagination. And also, I'm enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. So it would appear that in order to be innovative, the first step we need to realize is that we need to learn to become artists again. One's right brain is the creative side, the artistic side. That's where the ideas come from. The left brain is the logical side, and that tells us how to do and to make those ideas come true. Our second step on the path to innovation is to re-look at what we have, to repurpose what we have, and not just think of replacing and throwing things away. As George Kneller, the educationalist, said, to think creatively, we must look afresh at what we've taken for granted. There's a massive amount of existing technology in our industry that just simply cannot be practically or economically replaced. A greater emphasis should be placed on the development of smart ecosystems, preferably by repurposing proven, simple, standardized components, but in new and innovative ways. We must find creative ways to breathe new life into old technology. In this regard, an invaluable lesson I learned in my life about never underestimating the power of technology to breathe new life into old was with my old 1970 Instamatic slides. I carried these things around for many decades thinking no one will ever get out a slide projector and go and look at these tiny things. But technology came to the rescue. Now you can scan these photographs and together with Photoshop breathe new life into them and share them on YouTube and Facebook and on Ancestry sites as well. Step 3 is a much more subtle but extremely important aspect, and that is to cherish simplicity over complexity. Again, quoting Albert Einstein, make everything as simple as possible, but not one bit simpler. It would appear, whether we know it or not, we have a bit of a predisposition to accepting that if something is complex, it must be better. And it's also easy to get very distracted by complexity. This just means, however, that we have to try even harder to keep innovation elegantly simple. I love this quote from Leonardo da Vinci: "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." Another step in the successful innovation process is to balance connectivity with cohesion. Now, as in nature, connectivity of components or organisms is essential to a good functioning ecosystem. Cohesion, however, refers to stickiness between those elements in the smart ecosystem, increasing component interdependence and overall vulnerability. Redundancy and robustness of the ecosystem is compromised. Magpies are attracted to bright and flashy things. We too suffer from a similar problem. However, life is recognizable in its expression that form ever follows function, as quoted by Louis Sullivan, who was an architect. In other words, what something does, its function, should drive what it looks like, its form. Diverse ecosystems have many organisms or components. As organisms in nature occupy a particular niche, so too components within smart ecosystems should aim to fulfill a specific and clearly defined single function, what we often refer to as modularization. The current tendency to over-functionalize components in the name of the word smart adds unnecessary complexity and risk. Many added functions aren't even used, and some can have unwanted impacts on critical functionality that is used. Probably the biggest single barrier to innovation is step 7, realizing that processes or use cases belong to the entire ecosystem. We have a strong tendency not to focus on the big picture. That's to say, we tend not to look at needs, processes, and use cases and outcomes at the level of the ecosystem, and instead focus on a part of that, such as at the component or organism level. The most obvious example of this is our obsession with devices, such as smartphones and smart meters. However, without the corresponding ecosystems, these devices are as good as useless. This, as I have said, is probably the single biggest barrier to innovation. One cannot be innovative if one has self-imposed thought boundaries. There are many innovations, diamonds in the rough, waiting for someone to view things broadly at the ecosystem level. Finally, as in nature, step 8 cautions us to not forget the checks and balances. Without checks and balances, one organism can gain the upper hand within a biological ecosystem, which can produce large consequential impacts to the entire ecosystem. And similarly, in the smart ecosystem, a small anomaly in one component can trigger significantly errant behaviors within other components or compromise the entire process. Once again, as Albert Einstein says, assume nothing and question everything. So in conclusion, remember that innovation is an art, not a science. So encourage the artist in you, your colleagues, and most of all in your children. Thanks for watching.